Hello, everybody. My name's Professor Michael White. I'm the head of the History of Art Department at the University of York, and welcome to this event with the title Off Limits, Art, Social Media and Censorship. This session explores increasing restrictions on the circulation of images in the age of the internet, in particular in the context of demands for social media companies to show responsibility and remove certain images from the web. What are the implications for artists who increasingly need to use social media to build their careers? In addition, there are major questions concerning whether a huge amount of historical art can be circulated online at all. As artists and museums move ever more into the space of the internet, we ask where we should place the boundaries between freedom of expression and social responsibility. So today's event is part of the York Festival of Ideas Online. Although in a different format, the festival continues to aim to enhance York's reputation as a city of ideas and innovation through offering the highest caliber of public events. The 2020 festival has over 60 online events offering an inspiring programme for all ages. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the adventure we're about to take you on. Now, I'm going to introduce the speakers for the session in a moment, and I'll be introducing them in the order in which they will then present, and they will kind of convene after their presentations for some panel discussion. So our first speaker will be Professor Amy Werbel, Professor of Art History at the Fashion Institute of Technology at the State University of New York. She's currently at the University of Old York as a Fulbright Fellow, researching art censorship. Amy joined the State University of New York in 2013 as a specialist in the art of the United States. She's the author of numerous works on the subject of American visual culture and sexuality, including Lust on Trial, Censorship and the Rise of American Obscenity in the Age of Anthony Comstock. It was published by Columbia University Press in 2018 and was the winner of the 2019 Peter C. Rollins Book Prize of the Northeast Popular and American Culture Association. After Amy, then, we will hear from Joanne Leah, a contemporary artist whose image-based work explores themes of sexuality, isolation, and identity. She focuses on live models that exist on the fringe of society, sex workers, people from the BDSM and LGBTQA+ communities, as well as non-traditional body types. Her recent exhibitions include Acid Mass at the Not For Them Gallery in Queens, NSFW, Female Gaze at the Museum of Sex, and a performance installation project, Fetish. She founded ArtistsAgainstCensorship.com, which acts as a liaison between artists and social media policymakers. Joanne lives in New York City, and you can find examples of her work on her Instagram page at two-faced-kitten, all one word, and also at joanneleah.com, Joanne Leah, all one word. Then we'll hear from Kyveli Lignou-Tsamantani. She's an art historian, currently finishing her doctoral studies in the History of Art Department at the University of York, funded by the Arts Humanities Research Council through the White Rose College of Arts Humanities Consortium and the A.G. Leventis Foundation. Her PhD focused on the invisibility of atrocity images in contemporary art and the ethics of spectatorship. She holds an MA in History of Art from the University of York and a BA in Theory and History of Art from the Athens School of Fine Arts in Greece. She's worked in a curatorial capacity on exhibitions and public programs in Greece and the United Kingdom, and has participated in research projects at the Athens School of Fine Arts and the Pantheon University of Social and Political Sciences, Athens, Greece. And then our fourth panelist is Belit, a videomaker and visual artist living in Amsterdam. Her moving image background is rooted in her work with video activist groups in Ankara and Istanbul. She was resident artist at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in New York and at the Rijksacademie van Bildende Kunsten in Amsterdam. Her practice focuses on the role of visual representations of violence and the experience and perception of political conflicts in Turkey, Germany, and the Netherlands. So quite a panel. I'm very excited to get going now. So I think we're going to move over, first of all, to Amy. So if Amy, if you are able to share your slides with us.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to the York Festival of Ideas. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about a topic that I've been researching for about 15 years. And I am a specialist in art of the United States, and especially art between the Civil War and World War I. And this was the period of time when America experienced its most heightened and oppressive censorship campaigns. And what I found in the course of my research was that the censorship definitely produced self-censorship, right? That kind of cracking down on sexual images made some people self-censor, and we don't really know, we can't know the work that wasn't made. But it also had the effect of motivating many artists to make exactly the thing that censors wanted to remove from American visual culture. And I use an example here from my book, Lust on Trial. The Comstock laws passed in 1873 ushered in a wave of art censorship. And one of the things swept up in these raids was a magazine produced by the Art Students League of New York in 1906 called The American Student of Art. And because this magazine had examples of student work that included life drawings, and you can see examples of those on the left, with full frontal nudity, the magazine was swept up in these raids against obscenity, obscenity meaning that it was criminally liable because of its sexual content. And many artists, such as Thomas Eakins and Robert Henry, responded in exactly the opposite way that censors intended, in that Thomas Eakins, for the very first time, made a painting featuring full frontal female nudity. And you can see that the models actually look remarkably similar. And this led to the adoption of nudity, and especially full frontal nudity, as a symbol of modernity. And so we see Robert Henry in this work that he made for the Armory exhibition, a very important exhibition in New York that was to show the most modern art from around the world. And this is when a lot of, the Cubists get introduced to New York. And what Robert Henry made to symbolize modernity in that moment was exactly the type of image that censors would have taken down. So my point being that censorship does not always produce the results that you expect. And I've been here in the UK researching, a comparative examples, and I found basically the same thing. Even though there's no First Amendment here, but when Parliament passed the Obscene Publications Act in 1857, artists did not respond in the manner they might have been expected to. And in fact, many artists, including Frederick Leighton, who's president of the Royal Academy, get into the business of making nudes at that time. And I'm always fascinated as to how this plays out for male and female artists, for artists of different class status, race, ethnicity. So censorship has obvious intended consequences that we can see. People get in trouble, work is taken down, but it also has unintended consequences. And one of the things I've just been fascinated by is to watch artists like Joanne and the artists that she documents on her wonderful website, artistsagainstcensorship.com, to see how they sometimes subvert the rules and sometimes reject the rules, but keep making work. And so my own research is really focused on the resistance, and it was with us 150 years ago, and it's still with us today. And with that, I'm going to be very happy to turn things over to Joanne so that you can enjoy her wonderful work.
Okay, hi, my name is Joanne Leah, and I am an artist in New York City. And this is my work on the screen now. As you can see, I create images using nude bodies. As an artist, I have struggled with social media censorship for many years. So in 2017, I wrote a petition on change.org asking Facebook and Instagram to reevaluate their community standards. I started talking to other artists about censorship and documenting their experiences online. I have saved them in one place, artistagainstcensorship.com. That's the petition. And this is Artists Against Social Media Censorship. I've collected so far maybe 25 stories of artists. And in the meantime, my own work started to evolve. And I started using composition and materials to experiment with Instagram's algorithm. The images on the left were censored, and then the images on the left were censored, and on the right, were not censored. So they're in pairs. And as you can see, some of them are the same photograph, just flipped upside down or recropped, very similar. About a year after I wrote this petition, someone from the Facebook policy team emailed me. I came across your petition on change.org and would like the opportunity to discuss it. And at first I thought it was a spam email, but I responded and it ended up being legit. So I began consulting with someone from Facebook's policy team and a few members of their engineering team as well. We would meet digitally and talk about nudity in art and photography. And I was able to see some charts and tables, help them with their guidelines, ideas for implementing new ways for people to respond to censorship. Let's see. I learned how they created their community standards and learned how they flag and remove images using a combination of artificial intelligence and human moderators. They also use shadow banning as a tool. It's kind of like a warning or a slap on the wrist. Shadow banning is relatively new. They just started admitting that they use this tool. If you're shadow banned on Instagram, your content doesn't appear to anyone else. Policymakers do not acknowledge the term shadow ban. If you have a certain percentage of content removed, you will be shadow banned for a certain amount of time. They do not state this on their community guidelines either. And then through word of mouth, I started acting as a liaison between artists and Facebook and Instagram who believe they have followed the community guidelines but have been erroneously censored. And in October, I helped organize an art community roundtable at Instagram's headquarters. There were people from museums there, artists, curators, and several people from the policy team, as well as engineering and upper management. Instagram and Facebook are necessary for emerging artists to promote themselves, connect with collectors and galleries. And censorship creates a culture of anxiety that wouldn't exist without it. So I'll leave you with a question. Why is a single corporation, an advertising platform, because that's what it is, deciding what is pornography and what is art and what is appropriate and what is obscene? So thank you, Amy, for inviting me to talk about this important topic.
Thank you very much, Joanne. That was fantastic. Now we're going to take a slight shift to a slightly different topic and move to Kyveli.
So, hi also from me. I would first and foremost like to thank Michael for the invitation to participate in this event and the York Festival of Ideas for providing us every year a great platform for so many interesting events. I will start this short presentation by explaining how my doctoral research relates to today's topic, then briefly examine 3 photographs and how they were or were not censored on social media, and finally spend a couple of minutes to explain what drew my attention to Belit's work. Although this panel focuses mainly on art censorship, I believe that the examination of censorship of photojournalistic images, which would not be classified as artworks, lies at the background of any discussion on art censorship and violence. My rationale here is formulated by my research, which lies at the intersection of the journalistic representations of violence, death and suffering, and their appropriation by 21st century artists in ways that they are rendering them invisible. By using images that have either been widely disseminated and hence have become iconic, or images that were never seen due to different systems of censorship, these artists are making one question their positioning as a viewer. Hence, at the core of my work exists the ethics of spectatorship, when one is not able to see the dead or sufferer other anymore. but has many different hints that indicate their existence. Before embarking to the exploration of visual material, I thought it might be interesting to start with a quote by Judith Butler from 2010, a thinker that has examined in many different occasions issues of censorship. So as Butler suggests, and I quote, "But we can ask, is this regulation of violence also violent in some way? And if it is, how do we describe that violence? It seems we are talking about two kinds of efforts." And she continues, "The first seeks to suppress the public understanding of violence, which verges on the denial that violence exists. The second seeks to structure the appearance of violence in such a way that violence is always already interpreted, rationalized, and justified." End of quote. I feel that Butler here draws this very thin blur line on which one must be very skillful in order to not fall over. How should also we as speakers present violence when we get the chance to use a public forum as this festival? As I already said, today I'm aiming to take us through three photographs that in the one way or the other have some kind of strong link with our contemporary social media culture. Yet, as you will notice, I have chosen to not show you these photos, but instead include their caption and a blank frame. This could be seen as my personal solution on Butler's warning on the potential reiteration of violence. However, there are several other reasons for this decision, and they are directly linked with my line of thought. All the three photographs, which I will not show to you today, have been widely shared, seen, and discussed. Many might wonder now, if that is the case, why to not show them one more time and instead choose to impose another level of censorship on the panel that examines censorship? Because I believe that the endless reproduction of images of suffering is creating a misconception of a normalization of the actual violence potentially. Although I am an avid supporter for the existence of atrocity images for political, human rights, and educational purposes, by having the opportunity to give this presentation in a format that will expect the audience to be connected through some kind of device, Google is just one tab away. So it should be up to you to decide if you will search for them or not, and if you will look at them or not. The first image is of a child that got drowned in the Mediterranean, an image that was widely shared across many different social media platforms without being removed for censorship purposes, despite its difficult nature. The photograph was showing the dead body of Alan Kurdi, a Syrian refugee boy who was drowned on September 2nd, 2015. The photograph was taken in Bodrum, Turkey by the female photographer Nilüfer Demir of Dogan News Agency. A cropped version of the image went viral in less than 24 hours. I still remember very clearly seeing this image on my Facebook newsfeed. I remember getting angry that people were just sharing it, getting angry that most of the social media users would not pay the needed attention. This image created certain shifts, both in terms of policy, however. It created changes both in policy making and the public's perception towards the Mediterranean migrant and refugee crisis, even though some of those changes were not very, with a very long lasting effect. Interestingly enough, although here I have included a screenshot from how this image appears now on my Facebook, if I search the words Alan Kurdi, the photograph was not censored when it first appeared on our screens. Probably the reason why it didn't was that it did not violate any of the regulations of this online community. Yet, that wasn't the case with another photograph, one which has also been seen from many viewers across decades, something that has given to it an iconic status, an image of war, which despite having been seen again and again in different frameworks, created a controversy in 2016 when Facebook censored it. That is Nick Ut's The Terror of War from 1972. A lot of people might recall this photograph by the Associated Press photographer as the Napalm Girl image. The image was captured on the 8th of June 1972, near a village that had just been bombed with napalm by South Vietnamese planes. The photograph shows 4 soldiers on the background and 5 kids screaming and crying while running on the foreground. Kids, Phan Thi Kim Phuc, is naked. The controversy took place in September 2016 when the Norwegian writer Tom Egeland published a post about 7 photographs that changed history. One of the photographs of this post was also the napalm girl image. The post was deleted by Facebook for censoring purposes, especially because of this particular image, with the justification that while we recognize that this photo is iconic, it's difficult to create a distinction between allowing a photograph of a nude child in one instance and not others, end of quote. Yet what needs to be considered is whether this total, in visual terms, censorship takes place for the sake of the spectator or for the sake of the sufferer or dead other. Interestingly enough, a similar practice was performed by Facebook in the 26th of October 2018, in the case of a New York Times article with the title "The Tragedy of Saudi Arabia's War." The particular article included a series of photographs from the famine in Yemen, and a few of the images show malnourished babies and kids. The first image captures Amal Hussein, a 7-year-old emaciated Yemen girl, was the main reason why Facebook deleted the reposting of the article from many users' accounts. As Facebook stated, and I quote, "As our community standards explain, we do not allow nude images of children on Facebook, but we know this is an important image of global significance," a spokeswoman said in an emailed statement to the newspaper. And it continued, "We are restoring the posts we removed on this basis." So the posts in this case were restored after a couple of days. To my mind, paradoxically, this kind of severe censorship is there in order to protect the photographed victim. And although it creates cultural and historical mistakes, its end under sea aims to be the photographed other, not the spectator, even if that is not happening always successfully. Visual censorship takes many different visual forms: pixelation, blurring, cropping, or even totally erasing something. I am particularly interested in pixelation, which, as being partial concealment, can be understood as a mild version of censorship, especially because it is visually explicit, meaning it allows one to recognize color patterns, sizes of shapes, and so on and so forth. Hence, one can imagine what the image would look like. Pixelation was what drew my attention also to Belit's work, and on particular to her video, What Remains. Although she will talk much more thoroughly about it in a moment's time, for me, one of the most crucial parts of the video is when one sees a pixelated box at the bottom of the frame. As the artist explains, this pixelated rectangular shape is the reminiscent of the dead body of a female gorilla, a king one. The photograph resembles the photograph that is pixelated in this case, resembled trophy images and was circulated in different ways across media in Turkey. Apart from bringing to mind the shape of a dead body, this rectangle can also be linked to the shape of a coffin that hosts the dead in its final destination. A pixelated coffin as what remains not only from an extremely violent incident, but also from what one could call a self-content moderation process for ethical purposes. Essentially, what artworks like Belit's highlight is a thought process that can be seen as functioning as a subversion of the algorithm and the process of content moderation, which is dependent on human labor. Subverting it by choosing to not show a gruesome image, while at the same time skillfully highlighting its presence. Choosing not to show, not only in order to subvert the algorithm, neither, of course, in order to not offend us, the viewers, but exactly because the artistic process of taking one's ethical responsibility towards those images has preceded the creation of the artwork. The artwork, therefore, would never trigger any online content moderation flags, but if properly watched, would make one question their way of being accustomed in consuming images of atrocities. Thank you. And now we can move on to Belit's presentation and hear more about her interesting work.
First of all, thank you for having me in this really interesting panel. I'm Belit. I'm a visual artist working primarily with moving image and focusing on the role of visual representations of violence in the experience and perception of political conflicts in Turkey, Netherlands, and Germany. As an artist, I both record in these geographies of political conflicts, specifically in Turkey, and also engage with found footage and news media images. I also have a video activist background in Turkey, and I'm trying to create an ethical political framework where I can take decisions about these issues and about my work, specifically about showing, not showing, and how to show these violent images. I'll talk about 3 works. The first one is What Remains from 2018. Kyveli already mentioned this work. The second one is And the Image Gazes Back from 2014, and I Hanan Me from 2016. What Remains is a 7-minute long video I made in 2018. It's a video about me going back to my archive of images from 2015, 3 years prior, when I visited the town Cizre in the Kurdish region inside Turkey during curfews and attacks to cities, towns, villages of that region by Turkish security forces. These attacks came after the election of 2015, where the pro-Kurdish party won a high number of votes, and this led to Erdogan, the president of Turkey, not being able to legally pass the law in order to have executive rights as a president. And he could not extend his powers in 2015 as a result. His party didn't have enough seats in the parliament, so it could not legally pass. Then a series of attacks started, and these attacks targeted pro-Kurdish party voters, members, and local political actors, and the whole Kurdish geography inside Turkey. And What Remains revisits this period through its archived images. And the starting point of What Remains is the violated bodies of Kurdish guerrillas that were circulating online, especially in social media, murdered by Turkish security forces, and the circulation was by the Turkish security forces social media accounts. These images were circulating on social media first without, and later, quite immediately later, afterwards with pixelation used on mutilated dead bodies. And the pixelated areas were signifiers of a violent death, a violation of the nudity and the unity of the body, as well as on the photographic realm. On the photographic realm, a violation of the unity of the photograph. It's like a scar on the photograph and a scar in the political atmosphere. So I was creating these parallels in the video between those two scars. And it was also creating a current relationship between photography and that has been going on, existing for a really long time in literature of photography. I ask really basic questions in analyzing these images and their circulation, and whether or not to use these images and how to use these images. Who has taken these images and disseminating them? Who's being violated? Who is the perpetrator? What does the circulation of this image mean? What does it mean for me as an artist to contribute to the circulation of this image? What conversations I want to have in the video, in the work, and what conversations I want to initiate through the work. And the first questions are about power relationships that are explicit or implicit in the image itself visually, as well as in the dissemination of the image in the social media. And comes to questions about ethical responsibility of the artist and the political stance, which also includes respectful treatment of certain communities and their losses. And then comes the role of the work in creating the conversations the work aims to create. I want to also mention that I do through these thought processes, I came to a place where showing the image as it is as this violent image to the viewer and catching viewer off guard has consequences to the whole conversation. And what I aim to do is to have a conversation around such images. And my question is, what makes that conversation possible? The emotion that is triggered by being exposed to violent images are often not the ones that will make us stay and dig deeper into larger implications of such an image and how we are affected, how communities are affected by those images. In the end, I talk about these images, I talk about dead bodies and talk about people being killed, being violated, but also subvert the usage of pixelation, for example, in this specific work in What Remains, as an artistic strategy, as well as create my own terms of using it. Here we can see in the bottom of the screen, we can see a rectangular shape and pixelated rectangular shape, and it's a Kurdish woman, Gerilla Ekinwan, who was killed in 2015, and her image was being circulated. The frame was taken. The frame was from the image was from a Turkish security force, and I did not want to circulate this image as it is, and then I used this rectangular shape form image, and then a coffin-like structure that would then relate to and like a way to dignify her death, and that she didn't get and to show a respect to her death, and the burial process she had. Her burial process was also interrupted by security forces. And her body was violated physically, but also over the social media through the circulation of it. And I do believe it's important to circulate these images. I mean, not circulate these images, but the accessibility of these images are really important. I think that people are consciously able to, as conscious viewers, able to reach these images, but the circulations of them in the media becomes problematic for the reasons I've been mentioning. And these violent images carry a certain information that then they inform us in our looking. They inform us about the ways, for example, violent groups using social media, and in what context an image of a dead body becomes okay to use, let's say. It might be that when it's not violated, when the image is a respectful way to portray this person. And in this example, we can see a Victorian post-mortem image that the family, loved ones this image can accompany the family and the loved ones in their mourning. The second video is from 2014, and the image gazes back. And I was interested in the beheading videos of ISIS when I came across them in 2014, and I was interested in the camera angles, the clean filming, the change of microphone between the perpetrators and the victim, hinting at a pause during the filming process, and all the choices made by ISIS. And I started looking deeper into how they use video as a propaganda tool. And here I found an image from 1995 by David Fincher, a Hollywood movie, and how this image was a screenshot from 7 was really similar to the beheading video image, which I will show now. And they are similar in many ways. Beheading, deserted background, fundamentals, religious figures, and the good guy in black, the bad guy in orange jumpsuit, which I will not go into details. But what I did was erasing these images and putting them together, and as a way to bring out the similarities, taking out the victim image, the perpetrator image, the ISIS image, the celebrity image, all these different things in the image to bring. And I wanted to focus on the aesthetic of these images and the backgrounds, and creating a language to speak about these images, even in their absences, with the space they leave and create in us. A third one is Ayhan and Me, which is quite different than the other. And also the ISIS images were highly circulating, and started a big discussion around censorship in social media. I want to mention first, before I go to Ayhan and Me. Ayhan and Me was made in 2016, and it went through a quite different censorship process. The other works were not censored because of their also imagery that I decided to use in the end in those works. Ayhan and Me was It was an idea in 2015 it was commissioned for an exhibition that was supposed to take place in Amsterdam. The exhibition moved to Istanbul, and it's about a ex-police officer who claimed to have killed more than 1,000 Kurdish people in the course of 10 years in the 90s with the order of the state as part of the paramilitary wing of the police force, underground paramilitary wing. The video that I wanted to make never was realized, but then I made, because it was censored by the institution, exhibiting institution in Istanbul, and then I made a video about the censorship of that video, and that video was also the initial video, and the video I made in the end was also censored by the same institution, and this is the video screenshots about from that video. And what did not get censored by the algorithm kind of got censored by the state. And I want to mention also, last 3 images are images from Ayhan and me of a Kurdish political figure who was killed, and his dead body was dragged on the streets, and the video was circulating, and his family took to Twitter to say, please do not share those images, and share these images. And that's the end of my presentation. All my videos are on Vimeo. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, a very diverse range of material there, and quite a lot to discuss potentially. But I've got actually one way I'd like to begin that, and actually invite Amy and Joanne first to consider, which is, Amy, I think you really kind of started down a particular line of thought, which is how a situation concerning censorship could actually lead to some very kind of creative situations. So I wonder whether you can give us your thoughts on what you've heard, and how that relates to your experience of dealing with this issue historically.
Well, I think first I'd like to say that in law, traditionally, political speech and sexual speech, at least in American law, have been on separate kind of trajectories, and they can engage different kinds of situations. So, for example, in the United States, child pornography is regularly, prosecuted. Very little other art with sexual content is, I mean, almost none is prosecuted, but anything with children in it, right? Because it actually is, it's evidence of a crime, right? And there's a different status for images that are evidences of a crime than you would give, for example, to the work that Joanne makes with her models, right? Which comes from a place of kind of joy and creativity and expression. But that's also political speech. And the history of the suppression of sexual images comes from a very particular theological approach to the body and to the idea of sexuality. And so the history of censorship of sexual images may seem to be like completely separate. But first of all, a lot of there's always a blurry line. There's always going to be work that falls kind of in between or overlaps those categories. And I think we have to see all of that, the censorship, as being politically motivated in one way or another, so that the interest of a repressive authoritarian regime in censoring images of the crimes it has committed, right, is not entirely divorced from the efforts of a repressive religious regime to suppress images of sexuality that it does not believe are proper and good role models and in keeping with their faith. So that's how I see the connection between these.
Joanne, would you like to follow that up?
I think when Amy was talking about kind of like religious or faith or morality and sexuality, it made me think of something that Facebook said in our meeting. And they said something about, we want to stay true to American values. And that's why they censor nudity in art. And I just thought that was it was scary. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the question. Just again, perhaps just we keep this with Amy and Joanne for the moment. I'll bring in Kyveli and belit in a moment. I was very interested actually in this phrase community standards, because this kind of runs through a long history of defining law in this area about, well, who is the community and who sets those standards. What's your understanding of that particular phrase and what it means?
My understanding is it's a corporation wanting to, quote unquote, keep their viewers safe from maybe images they don't want to see or aren't ready to see, or might offend them or make them feel things they don't want to feel. And I think that essentially social media is advertising, and that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an advertising company. Yeah. And it's not good advertising, at least in America.
And I think it's such a great question, because whose community, right? Who defines the community that matters, and who, and I think Joanne's really right to point out that we have to remember Facebook is selling data. It's selling user data, and it wants consumers for you know, and to have all of this you know, material funneled through that pipeline is really quite dangerous to the ideals of free expression. And that's where, you know, I mentioned that gender matters and sexual orientation matters and class status matters, right? Like if you're rich, you can basically buy all the speech you want. And we have to be clear about, you know, that reality in America right now, and in much of the rest of the world as well. So, you know, I have long thought, you know, that what Facebook has gotten into is what I like to call whack-a-mole censorship. And artists help with that, right? Like, oh, the mole pops up here. Oh, no, write that down. But then something else, it's always going to be something else. And, you know, what's the end game? You know, where does this stop? Facebook started out with basically like 10 rules. And now its playbook, I think, is well, you know, close to 100 pages. But the idea that all of this speech can be censored, I think it's really an exercise in futility. And we need to think about the power structures, and everyone's talking about power in a way that monetize our expression, and also kind of make it very easy for our expression to be manipulated by political actors who are really reprehensible in many cases.
Joanne, just before we move on to Kyveli and belit, I mean, so Amy in her presentation actually used the word resistance. Is that how you conceive your practice? Is that a word you would use to describe what you do?
I wouldn't necessarily use the word resistance. I think it's more playful than that. I just kind of like to trick the algorithm into thinking it's one thing and just experimenting and seeing what happens. I guess it kind of evolved into some kind of resistance, but it didn't start out that way.
Right. Okay. Right. So if we go over to Kyveli and belit, I was really struck that even though we apparently were dealing with potentially different categories of images, just how much there is actually in common in terms of kind of artistic strategies here. But maybe we'll kind of start actually with now kind of moving, I guess, into different kind of geographies. We've been thinking there with Amy and Joanne about Facebook and about a kind of an American corporation. But here, actually, in terms of the examples you used, we're in quite literally in some different places. What's your kind of sense of how this functions internationally? Maybe Kyveli, do you want to pick that up to begin with?
I think what is interesting in terms of how platforms like Facebook censor photojournalistic images has to do with the question that goes back to what Amy said before, of if these regulations belong to a specific law in a specific nation, and what it means when digital. So it's kind of an international community who then chooses what we will be able to see or not. And what has happened, maybe belit also can talk a bit about that afterwards, in certain cases that violent or explicitly political photographs would create a kind of a turbulence in the status quo. Facebook uses the IP technique, which means that on certain territories, people can't actually share and see certain images without meaning that they are completely taking them off the platform. And that is not usually explicitly written on the regulations.
Yeah.
Leah, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of also like the term that Joanne was mentioning, shadow banning. There's a case in Turkey. I mean, it's a partial shadow banning that the Turkish government doesn't want certain sites to be visited, and they're actually visible, except they're not visible to any IP from Turkey, as Kyveli mentioned. This is like a practice that Google accepted that they're doing. So who's kind of, again, like who's deciding is the Turkish government in the end, and we're talking about the same kind of perpetrator that I am dealing with in my images in my work. So yeah.
So I wanted to come back to an issue again that Amy raised right at the beginning, and then and Kyveli, you kind of touched on in different ways, which are really to just kind of think about how you feel about it in relation to the kind of ethical dimensions that you were discussing, and that's the issue of self-censorship. There were aspects of what you were doing, which is about trying to kind of control the image to some extent, and pixelation was one prominent way. Might come back to Joanne a bit later to talk about cropping and about what is seen, what's not seen, what's implied. But do you want to say a little bit more about how that functions actually in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like I do not, the term self-censorship implies a power relationship that the decision is taken as a result of this power relationship as to kind of protect maybe oneself or to not, be censored in the end or different reasons. But what I'm doing in my work is completely something else. So it's my interventions are not a result of self-censorship, but it comes from more like an ethical stance where, do I want to show this image? What does it mean to show this image? And considering my own position, what does it do to circulate it? What does it do to the communities? Because mainly they're related to certain communities that are being oppressed. So these decisions define what kind of a stance you take in a way. So that's my bigger question, and I would definitely not consider it as a self-censorship. Yeah.
So Kyveli, you were very, very articulate about the choices you made in your presentation and what to show and what not to show, or how to show it. Would you like to pick this point up as well?
I guess I kind of constantly change my approach, or I kind of expand my approach on how I include or not include atrocity images when I am talking about them. One of the kind of the bottom line for me is, if I show the image, if I don't show the image, can my argument still make sense? So do I really need to show the image, or I'm just kind of perpetuating a voyeurist approach and seeing them without actually offering anything further? And at the same time, I think that, for example, when one is teaching, is important to show to students certain images with warning and warnings, and in a very well constructed framework. But for me today, one of the other reasons why I felt kind of a discomfort to share these images is that this presentation is actually taking place online. These images exist online. So I would just feed one more version of the same image. And I'm not sure that there is a real point on doing that.
Very, very, very interesting. Now, I just wanted to kind of move onto a slightly different subject, which is it came up just only very, very briefly in a couple of presentations. I'm going to come back to Joanne in a moment on this issue first, which is the notion of the algorithm that actually decisions might be being made by not by something human, but some the intervention of another sort of technology. And I know that in sort of separate moments that Amy and Kyveli and I have sort of discussed this. Obviously, algorithms are created by people, so they're not landed from outer space. But what is our sense of what these kind of technologies actually mean for creativity and also for judgment? So Joanne, so you mentioned that you are, producing images that are contesting some aspects of the algorithm. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think what comes to mind is like the female versus male nipple. The algorithm is designed to find a female breast, whatever that means. And with gender being what it is today, very fluid, this company, this corporation, again, is deciding what gender people are. So that can be very dangerous. But in my personal work, I try to like obscure things or like just show a little bit of something or a little bit of, or something that might be an armpit, but it looks like it might be pubic hair. And just kind of like play with that idea, like, oh, does the algorithm think that this is pubic hair, which is going against their community guidelines? And it's kind of interesting what you can get away with, what the algorithm is designed to do and what it isn't, what it doesn't catch.
I think you mentioned in your presentation that as well as talking to the policymakers, you also spoke to some engineers. Is that right? That you've had some kind of contact with people who are trying to, produce the actual computer mechanics of. I'm not going to profess that I really know how this works, but you've had some engagement with those sorts of people as well as policymakers.
Correct. The engineers, we were discussing whether or not to implement some kind of like, if you don't want to see nudity, then you can just choose not to see it, and the algorithm would just hide it from you. But the engineers were, at that time at least, were saying that was impossible to program into Instagram. And now, of course, shadow banning is very normal, which is the same thing. Another thing that comes to mind is nudity is allowed in protest. So if it's an image of protest, then nudity, female breasts are allowed, not full nudity. So that makes me question context. Like, if you can understand, if an algorithm can understand the context of protest, why can't it understand the context of fine art? So that's my question that hasn't been answered.
Wow, that's there's a whole symposium on that.
Correct.
At some point. Absolutely. So,
and if it did get figured out, the technology will change. That it would be, that question could be answered, but the answer would only be relevant for a few months. And that's been a story that's been true of the relationship between art and technology also for centuries. You think about the revolution of the printing press and the camera, and then different kinds of forms of mechanical reproduction of images. I think the really interesting difference about this age that we live in is, and I was thinking about this when Kyveli was talking about the idea of putting images that come from social media, putting them online into a link that could be shared in social media, that we no longer have, as compared with curators in museums, for example. I was thinking about the horrible photograph of Emmett Till, the young boy in the civil rights era who had been beaten. And his mother wanted that image to be seen. She wanted people to see what had been done to her baby. I mean, she said that in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is now on the Mall, there's like a shrine-like room in which that photograph exists. And it's about like halfway up through the exhibit, but you have to go in and see this sort of mock-up of his coffin, and there's a lot of contextualizing information, and then that photograph is there. But by the time you've gotten into it, you're in a kind of a space of kind of quiet and worship and prayer. Very few people can be in there, right? But the internet makes all of that impossible, right? So a beheading image and one of Joanne's beautiful photographs, like, and maybe just a regular old news story or somebody sharing their kid's birthday party. All of these things are just, thrown at users in the same way. And so there's a huge loss of control in terms of who sees what and in what way, and in the context, and what happens before the image is seen and what happens after the image is seen, which, curators are making thoughtful decisions about that all the time. And so in this moment, when galleries and museums are closed, we have lost that ability to see work in a thoughtful, careful way.
Yeah, that's really great, Amy. And I think we can bring this. I don't think we can actually, fully conclude, but to kind of draw actually towards at some point at the end, I think it'd be really important to hear from both of our artists how important it is for their work to be seen in this, online in these particular spaces, as opposed to in galleries in a more kind of traditional analog formats. I believe I can bring you back and just to talk about how important it is for your work as an artist to be able to use the internet, and to be able to kind of distribute your work, have it discussed in that space in a kind of free way. How important is that to you?
I have all my works online on Vimeo, which is also a certain platform, which is different than, the kind of, I guess, the speed of or decontextualizing of social media. I do find it on the one hand really important that my work is online and accessible, because it's also, it comes from a video activist practice. It comes from practices of not making things accessible to people who want to reach them. So it's really, really important for me on the one hand. And on the other hand, I also, for me, it's really important, like what I'm trying to do with my work is contextualize these moments, these photographs, these violent things that have happened. So for me, it's really important. The context is really important, and the physical space is really important as well. But I'm trying to do that in my work, and then be able to have the full work online, so that it kind of creates that space in itself and contextualize the events. But I'm not really using social media in that sense. Putting images online of my works really so much. And it really goes back to what Amy just said, that the context, how the context is kind of becomes this slippery ground that it's the control is lost and context is lost in social media. Yeah.
And Joanne, with you, so in terms of how or where your work exists, how significant actually is this internet space to you?
For me, it's very significant because it's how I created my community. So by posting the work online, I'm able to find more people to photograph. And a result of that is creating this safe sanctuary for people that aren't quote unquote typical models, or they live on the fringe of society, or they're sex workers, or they're, trans. And we can safely create something beautiful together. And that's where the trust comes from. It's from sharing that work online.
Great. Well, brilliant. I mean, I think the four fantastic presentations, some amazing discussions, a real cornucopia of kind of ideas and an ongoing problem or issue that I think we'll need to continue to think about and grapple with. I'd like to thank all four of you enormously for taking part in this event today. It's been absolutely brilliant. And to our viewers out there, the recording of this event will be available on the festival YouTube channel, which can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival website. And we hope that you'll continue to be engaged with the York Festival of Ideas and check out its website, yorkfestivalideas.com, for full details of all the events in the festival programme. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on these events and continue the conversations using the hashtag York Ideas. So I think that brings, I don't know quite how to do I could do my little virtual I'll kind of find it here. Round of applause.
Yay! Thank you, everyone. That was
Clapping
really
emoji.
fascinating.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.